The American Revolutionary War was one of the most important events in American history and one of the most important events in the entire world. As an American, the Revolutionary War was fundamental to this country and had a direct impact that not only me but the entire world feels to this very day, as the war allowed for the existence of Americans as a nationality. I'd like to inform you of the American Revolutionary War, the events which took place during the War for Independence, and through this speech I'll inform you of the events of the War of Independence and the nature of them. The American Revolutionary War, which is also known as the American War for Independence, secured American independence from Great Britain. Important events which preluded the events of the war was the Stamp Act of 1765, the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, the First and Second Continental Congress. The Stamp Act of 1765 was the initial tax levied directly onto American colonists by the British Parliament. The tax imposed tax onto all paper documents within the colonies, and came from a time in which the British Empire was in great debt from the 7 Years' War. The British Empire wanted to use the American colonies as a source of revenue. The Boston Massacre was a confrontation between 9 British soldiers and a crowd of 300 to 400 American colonists. Out of the 300 to 400 American colonists, 5 were shot by the British soldiers. The event was later publicized as a massacre by leading patriots Paul Revere, Samuel Adams. The depictions of propaganda and reports caused tensions to rise immediately throughout the 13 colonies. The Boston Tea Party was a political and mercantile protest enacted by the Sons of Liberty in Boston, Massachusetts on December 16, 1773. The target of the protest being the Tea Act of May 10, 1773, which allowed British West India Company to sell tea from China and American colonies without paying taxes, aside from those prescribed in the Townshend Act. The First Continental Congress was a meeting of 12 delegates that became the United States and met on September 5th to October 26 in 1774. The Second Continental Congress was a meeting of delegates of the 13 colonies who were united in the Revolutionary War. This Congress created a new country called the United Colonies, which was then later renamed to the United States. It convened in Philadelphia on May 10, 1775. Now that we have discussed the leading events that led to the Revolutionary War, the Stamp Act, the Boston Massacre, the First Continental Congress, and the Second Continental Congress, we'll discuss the first engagement of the Revolutionary War, the Battle of Concord and Lexington. In late 1774, the colonial leaders adopted the Suffolk Resolves as resistance to alterations made by the Massachusetts colonial government by the British Parliament following the Boston Tea Party. In response, the colonial assembly, the Patriot Provisional Government, known as the Massachusetts Provincial Government, the provincial government, called for the local militias to train for a conflict. In response, the British government declared Massachusetts to be in a state of rebellion. The Battle of Lexington, while commonly styled as a battle, is far more of a brush or skirmish, as regulars entered under Pitcairn entered Lexington at sunrise on Wednesday, April 19, 1775. 80 militiamen emerged from the Buckman Tavern and stood within the ranks on the village common, watching the British soldiers. Between 40 to 100 spectators watched from alongside the road. Their leader was Captain John Parker, a veteran of the French and Indian War who developed tuberculosis and was occasionally difficult to hear. After waiting most of the night without a sign of British, at 4:14 p.m., Parker confirmed the presence of British soldiers. Now that we have covered the Battle of Concord and Lexington, the first military engagement of the Revolutionary War, we'll discuss the campaign of Yorktown, which led directly to serious peace discussions and the end of the war. The campaign involved the land and naval forces of Great Britain, France, and the land forces of the United States. The British forces were sent to Virginia between January and April 1781, and joined Cornwallis in May, which came from the north and expanded in a campaign in the southern states. These forces were set against weekly by the Virginia militia, but General George Washington first sent Marquis de Lafayette and then Anthony Wayne with the Continental troops to oppose the raiding and economic havoc caused by British soldiers. And then the coalesced American forces, however, were insufficient in number to oppose the British forces, and only after a series of controversially confusing orders by General Sir Henry Clinton, the British commander-in-chief, that Cornwallis transferred to Yorktown. Once British soldiers were defeated, the surrender negotiations were complicated by two issues. When American forces surrendered at Charleston in 1781, they were not granted customary terms of laying down arms that included flying colors and playing the enemy tune. Washington expressed amazement that the Americans had won the war against a leading world power. The victory of the Americans was considered a miracle. The conflict between British subjects within the Crown averse to those with the Congress had lasted more than 8 years, from 1775 to 1783. The last uniformed troops departed their last East Coast port cities in Savannah, Charleston, and New York City by November 25th, 1783. That marked the end of British occupation of the new United States. We have examined the Revolutionary War, the events preluding to the war, and why the colonies wanted independence. The Battle of Concord and Lexington, how it started and unfolded, and the Siege of Yorktown and the aftermath of the war.